A flashing light in the rearview mirror. A tailored suit pressed brutally against cold steel. When a power-tripping officer decided to teach a successful black lawyer a lesson, he thought he had picked an easy target. He was dead wrong. What happened in that courtroom shocked the entire state. The clock on the dashboard of the Mercedes-Benz S-Class read 11:42 p.m. Arthur Pendleton rubbed his temples, feeling the deep, lingering exhaustion of a grueling 3-week trial finally settling into his bones. At 42, Arthur was a senior partner at Harrison & Cross, one of the most ruthless and prestigious corporate defense firms in Chicago. He had just secured a massive dismissal for a Fortune 500 client, and all he wanted was to return to his home in the affluent, quiet suburb of Oak Park, pour a glass of 18-year-old scotch, and sleep for 2 days. The streets were slick with fresh autumn rain, reflecting the amber glow of the streetlights. Arthur drove exactly 3 miles under the speed limit. He was a man who lived by the letter of the law, a man whose entire existence was predicated on navigating the complex, microscopic details of legal codes. But out here, on a dark tree-lined suburban road, none of his accolades mattered to the police cruiser idling in the shadows of an intersection. As Arthur passed, the cruiser's headlights flicked on. 2 blocks later, the agonizingly familiar flash of red and blue bathed the interior of Arthur's car. Arthur let out a slow, measured breath. He pulled over smoothly, parked under a streetlight to ensure maximum visibility, turned off the engine, and placed both hands firmly on the top of the steering wheel. He had given this exact talk to his teenage nephew 100 times. Keep your hands visible. Do not make sudden movements. Be polite, but know your rights. In the rearview mirror, he watched the heavy silhouette of Officer Thomas Brady step out of the cruiser. Brady was a 15-year veteran of the force, a man whose personnel file was thick with use-of-force complaints that had miraculously vanished into the bureaucratic ether. Brady had a reputation in the precinct. He didn't like outsiders in his patrol zone, and he had a very specific, prejudiced definition of what an outsider looked like. Accompanying Brady was a young rookie, Officer Kevin Miller, who hung back near the trunk of the Mercedes, looking nervous. Brady approached the driver's side window, shining his high-lumen maglite directly into Arthur's eyes, deliberately blinding him. License, registration, and proof of insurance, Brady barked, his voice dripping with an unearned, aggressive authority. "Good evening, officer," Arthur said, his voice calm, resonant, and entirely steady. "My license is in my wallet in my back right pocket. My registration is in the glove compartment. With your permission, I am going to reach for them." Brady's jaw tightened. He didn't like the vocabulary. He didn't like the diction. And he certainly didn't like the $150,000 car. "Just get the documents. And no sudden moves, or we're going to have a serious problem." Arthur retrieved his wallet slowly, extracted his driver's license, and then leaned over to pop the glove compartment. He handed the neatly folded documents out the window. Brady snatched them. He looked at the name, Arthur Pendleton. He looked at the address. It was a gated community less than a mile away, a neighborhood where houses started at $3 million. Brady's eyes flicked back down to Arthur. "Whose car is this, Arthur?" Brady asked, intentionally dropping the formal title, his tone laced with heavy sarcasm. "It is my vehicle, officer," Arthur replied, "as the registration clearly states. And what do you do for a living that affords you a car like this?" Brady pressed, leaning his forearm against the roof of the Mercedes, an intimidation tactic designed to invade Arthur's personal space. "I am an attorney," Arthur said coolly. "Officer, may I ask why I was pulled over?" Brady didn't answer. Instead, he took Arthur's license and held it out, completely outside the window, before deliberately letting it slip from his fingers. The plastic card clattered onto the wet asphalt. "Oops," Brady deadpanned. "Looks like you dropped it. Step out of the vehicle and pick it up." Arthur stared at him. "Officer, I am legally required to remain in my vehicle unless ordered out for a lawful Terry stop or an arrest. If you are ordering me out of the car, I need you to state your reasonable, articulable suspicion for doing so." The legal jargon hit Brady like a match to gasoline. His face flushed a dark, violent red. "I'm giving you a lawful order. Step out of the car right now, or I will drag you out." Before Arthur could even unbuckle his seatbelt, Brady yanked the door handle. Finding it unlocked, he hauled the heavy door open, reached in, and grabbed Arthur by the lapels of his custom Zegna suit. "Hey, what are you doing?" Arthur shouted, the calm facade finally breaking as sheer, raw adrenaline flooded his system. With a violent heave, Brady pulled the lawyer from the driver's seat. He didn't just pull him out, he spun him around with massive force. Slam! Arthur's face and chest crashed against the wet hood of his own Mercedes. The metal dented slightly under his weight. Pain exploded in his cheekbone, and the wind was knocked completely out of his lungs. "Stop resisting! Stop resisting!" Brady screamed at the top of his lungs, a practiced performance for his rookie partner and any potential witnesses. "I am not resisting!" Arthur gasped. His hands splayed flat on the hood. Brady shoved his forearm into the back of Arthur's neck, grinding his face into the cold metal. He grabbed Arthur's left arm, wrenching it up at an agonizing angle until Arthur heard a sickening pop in his shoulder. Cold steel cuffs snapped violently around his wrists, biting deep into the skin. Officer Miller, the rookie, stepped forward tentatively. "Tom." He wasn't doing anything. "Shut up, Miller," Brady spat. "He took a swing at me. You saw it. He assaulted a police officer." Arthur lay pinned against the hood, rain mixing with the blood trickling from a cut on his cheek. He didn't struggle. He didn't speak. In that moment, staring at the wet pavement, Arthur made a silent, unbreakable vow. He wasn't just going to sue this officer. He was going to dismantle his entire life. The holding cell at the 4th Precinct smelled of ammonia and stale sweat. Arthur sat on the concrete bench, his expensive suit ruined, his shoulder throbbing with a dull, relentless agony. He had been stripped of his belt, his shoelaces, and his dignity, but his mind was running at 1,000 miles an hour. At 3:00 a.m., the heavy steel door clanged open. A desk sergeant stood there, looking incredibly uncomfortable. Behind him stood Charles Montgomery, the managing partner at Arthur's firm. Charles was a titan of the legal world, a man who played golf with judges and senators. He looked at Arthur, bruised and battered behind bars, and a cold, terrifying fury settled over his features. "Get him out of here," Charles said to the sergeant. The tone wasn't a request. It was an execution order. By 4:30 a.m., Arthur was sitting in the plush conference room of his downtown office, an ice pack pressed to his face. Charles slid a copy of the police report across the mahogany table. "Officer Thomas Brady," Charles said, reading from the file. "Charges: reckless driving, failure to comply with a lawful order, resisting arrest, and felony assault on a police officer. Brady claims he pulled you over for a broken taillight. He claims you became belligerent, refused to provide identification, exited the vehicle aggressively, and threw a closed fist punch at his jaw, necessitating a physical takedown." Arthur let out a dark, bitter laugh. "My taillights are fine, and I never moved a muscle until he dragged me out by my collar." "There's more," Charles said, his voice tightening. "Brady's body cam miraculously malfunctioned 2 minutes before the stop. It only turned back on after you were already in handcuffs. The rookie, Miller, his camera was blocked by the vehicle's frame." "Convenient," Arthur muttered. "It's his word against mine. A decorated white officer against a black man in the middle of the night. Even with my credentials, a jury in this county is a coin toss on an assault charge." "So what's the play?" Charles asked. We can get this pleaded down to a misdemeanor tomorrow. With your record, it's a fine and community service. I can make a call to the district attorney. Arthur slammed his good hand onto the table. No deals. I want this to go to trial. Charles raised an eyebrow. Arthur, if you lose a felony assault case, you will be disbarred. Your career is over. You go to prison. I am not going down for something I didn't do, Arthur said, his eyes burning with a fierce, calculating fire. But we need evidence. Bring me Rachel. Rachel Adler was the firm's lead private investigator. She was a former FBI intelligence analyst. Brilliant, cynical, and terrifyingly efficient. By noon that day, Rachel was sitting in Arthur's office, sipping black coffee. I canvassed the neighborhood, Rachel said, dropping a manila folder on his desk. Oak Park is a fortress. There are no city traffic cams on that specific stretch of road. However, I found something better. She pulled out a photograph of a sprawling, modern mansion located right at the corner of the intersection where Arthur was assaulted. This property belongs to Harrison Trent, the CEO of a major cybersecurity firm, Rachel explained. Trent is highly paranoid. His property is surrounded by military-grade, 4K resolution security cameras hidden in the oak trees. They don't just cover his driveway, they cover a 300-foot radius of the street. I paid him a visit. He hates the local PD because they ticketed his wife last month. He was more than happy to hand over the raw, unedited footage. Rachel pulled out a USB drive and plugged it into the massive flat-screen TV in Arthur's office. She clicked play. The room fell dead silent as the high-definition video played. The angle was perfect. The street lights illuminated the scene like a movie set. They watched Arthur's car pull over. They watched Brady approach. The camera was so high-tech that the directional microphones picked up the muffled audio of the exchange. They saw Brady drop the ID. They saw Brady rip open the door and drag Arthur out like a ragdoll, slamming him into the car without a single moment of resistance from the lawyer. They saw the brutal, unprovoked assault. Charles Montgomery let out a low whistle. Good God. This is an open and shut case. We take this to internal affairs right now. We give it to the press. Brady is fired by Friday. No, Arthur said softly. Charles and Rachel both turned to look at him. If we give this to internal affairs now, Arthur explained, his voice cold and precise, Brady gets fired. Maybe he gets a slap on the wrist. The police union protects him. He quietly resigns, and he gets a job as a cop in the next county over in 6 months. That is not justice. What do you want to do? Rachel asked. Arthur smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We bury the footage. We don't utter a word about it to the prosecution during discovery. We let them take this all the way to a preliminary hearing. We let Officer Brady get up on that stand, place his hand on the Bible, and swear under oath to his fabricated report. Charles's eyes widened as he realized the strategy. You want to trap him in perjury. I don't just want to trap him, Arthur said. I want to humiliate him in open court. I want to lock him in a federal penitentiary for perjury, falsifying a police report, and civil rights violations under the color of law. But to do that, he has to tell his lies to the judge first. The trap was set. But there was one massive variable they hadn't accounted for. 2 weeks later, Arthur received the court docket. The judge assigned to his preliminary hearing was none other than Judge Eleanor Caldwell. Judge Caldwell was legendary in the district. She was notoriously conservative, heavily backed by the Fraternal Order of Police, and had a reputation for handing down maximum sentences to anyone who dared cross law enforcement. She was known as the Iron Gavel, and she detested high-priced defense attorneys. When Charles saw the assignment, he paled. Arthur, Caldwell will eat you alive. If she gets even a hint of what we're doing, she will hold us in contempt. She takes the word of a police officer as gospel. Arthur adjusted his tie, looking at his reflection in the office window. The bruising on his cheek had faded to a dull yellow, but the anger in his chest was sharper than ever. "Let her try," Arthur whispered. The stage was set for a collision course that would tear the courtroom apart. Officer Brady thought he was walking into a routine hearing to bury a man he despised. Judge Caldwell thought she was presiding over another open and shut assault case. Neither of them knew that Arthur Pendleton was walking into that courtroom carrying a loaded gun in the form of a flash drive, ready to pull the trigger. Municipal Courtroom 302 was a cavernous space of dark mahogany, fading green carpet, and palpable tension. Arthur Pendleton sat at the defense table, his posture immaculately straight, wearing a charcoal Tom Ford suit that cost more than the prosecutor's car. Beside him sat Charles Montgomery, his demeanor cool and impenetrable. Presiding over the preliminary hearing was Judge Margaret Caldwell. She sat high on the bench, a stern woman in her late 60s who viewed her courtroom as a sacred temple of order. When she looked down at Arthur, her expression was one of thinly veiled irritation. To her, Arthur was just another arrogant defense attorney who thought his money and status placed him above the law. Prosecutor David Sterling, an ambitious 30-something lawyer looking to make a name for himself, stood at the podium. The state calls Officer Thomas Brady to the stand. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open, and Officer Brady marched down the aisle. He wore his Class A dress uniform, the brass buttons polished to a mirror shine, looking every bit the decorated public servant. He took the stand, placed his right hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Officer Brady, Prosecutor Sterling began, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "Can you walk us through the events of October 12th at approximately 11:45 p.m.? Brady adjusted the microphone, looking completely relaxed. "I was conducting a routine patrol in Oak Park. I observed a black Mercedes-Benz with a defective right tail light. I initiated a standard traffic stop." "And how did the defendant respond?" Sterling asked, gesturing toward Arthur. "He was immediately belligerent, sir." Brady lied smoothly, not breaking eye contact with the prosecutor. He refused to provide his license and registration. He began yelling profanities. I ordered him to remain in his vehicle for his safety and mine, but he aggressively threw his door open and stepped out. "Did you feel threatened at this point, officer?" "Yes, sir." "Very much so," Brady said, putting on a masterful performance of a concerned civil servant. "I approached to de-escalate the situation, but the defendant lunged at me. He swung his right arm and delivered a closed fist punch to my jaw. At that point, fearing for my safety, I utilized a standard department-approved physical takedown to subdue him." Judge Caldwell nodded slowly, her pen scratching loudly across her notepad. She shot a withering glare at Arthur. The narrative was perfectly constructed. It was textbook. "No further questions, Your Honor," Sterling said, taking his seat with a smug smile. "Mr. Montgomery," Judge Caldwell said, her voice sharp, "you may cross-examine. And please, let's keep this brief. The facts seem rather straightforward." Charles Montgomery stood up slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. He walked to the center of the room, holding a single yellow legal pad. He didn't look at his notes. He just stared at Brady. "Officer Brady," Charles began, his voice a low, resonant baritone. "You testified that the defendant was belligerent. You testified that he refused to provide his license. Is that correct?" "That is correct," Brady said, jutting his chin out defiantly. "You are absolutely certain of this sequence of events?" "You are under oath, officer. I have been doing this for 15 years, counselor. I know what happened." "Excellent," Charles said calmly. "And you testified that Mr. Pendleton threw his door open and lunged at you. You never touched him, never laid a finger on him until he struck you in the jaw. Is that your sworn testimony? Yes. No possibility that your memory is clouded by the stress of the moment? Charles pressed, taking a step closer to the witness stand. No possibility that you opened the door? No possibility that you dragged him out of the vehicle? Prosecutor Sterling stood up. Objection, Your Honor, Aston answered. The defense is badgering the witness. Overruled, Judge Caldwell said, looking at Charles with narrowed eyes. But get to the point, Mr. Montgomery. Brady sneered. I didn't touch him until he hit me. He assaulted a police officer. Charles nodded slowly, walking back to the defense table. One last detail regarding the timeline. Officer Brady, your body-worn camera. According to the police report, it malfunctioned exactly 2 minutes prior to this interaction. Is that accurate? Yes, Brady said, feigning frustration. Technology fails sometimes. It's unfortunate. And your partner, Officer Miller? His camera was blocked by the frame of the cruiser? Yes. A bad angle. So, it is entirely your word against my clients, Charles stated. I guess it is, Brady replied, a faint, victorious smirk playing on his lips. He thought he had won. He thought he had completely outsmarted the high-priced lawyers. Charles Montgomery turned to Judge Caldwell, his expression completely devoid of emotion. Your Honor, the defense has no further questions for this witness at this time. However, we do have one piece of evidence we would like to introduce into the record. Judge Caldwell frowned, looking over her glasses. Evidence? Mr. Montgomery, this is a preliminary hearing, and discovery has already been concluded. What exactly are you proposing to introduce? Prosecutor Sterling stood up, looking alarmed. Your Honor, the state has received no additional exhibits from the defense? Your Honor, Charles said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. The state claimed there was no video evidence of this encounter. They built their entire case on the sworn testimony of Officer Brady. Just last night, the defense obtained a digital video file from a private security camera belonging to a citizen whose property overlooks the intersection in question. Under the rules of evidence, we are permitted to introduce this solely for the purpose of impeaching a witness who has just committed blatant perjury on the stand. The word perjury hung in the air like a live grenade. Brady's confident smirk vanished instantly. A cold sweat broke out on the back of his neck. Judge Caldwell's eyes darted from Charles to the police officer. She was a woman who respected the badge, but she abhorred liars in her courtroom above all else. Mr. Montgomery, if you are wasting this court's time with a blurry shadow, I will hold you in contempt. I assure you, Your Honor, the resolution is in 4K, Charles replied. He gestured to the bailiff, who rolled a large television monitor to the center of the floor. Charles plugged in a flash drive. Play it, Caldwell ordered. The courtroom fell into a suffocating dead silence. On the screen, the dark, rain-slicked street appeared in crystal-clear definition. The private camera's military-grade sensors illuminated the scene perfectly. The video showed Arthur's car pulling over. It showed Brady walking up to the window. Then, the highly sensitive directional microphones kicked in, sending the audio echoing through the courtroom. Good evening, officer. My license is in my wallet. With your permission, I am going to reach for them. Arthur's calm, respectful voice played loud and clear. Everyone in the room watched Brady snatch the papers. They watched him hold the license outside the window and deliberately drop it onto the wet asphalt. Oops. Looks like you dropped it. Step out of the vehicle and pick it up. Prosecutor Sterling physically took a step back from the podium, his face draining of all color. He looked at Brady in absolute horror. The video continued. It showed Brady yanking the door open. It showed him grabbing Arthur by the lapels and violently hurling him out of the car. Slam. The sound of Arthur's body hitting the hood of the Mercedes made several people in the gallery gasp. The video clearly showed Arthur's hands flat on the hood, completely compliant, offering zero resistance. "Stop resisting! Stop resisting!" Brady's voice screamed from the television, entirely disconnected from the reality of the visual evidence. The courtroom watched the officer violently twist Arthur's arm up until the horrific pop of the shoulder dislocation was audible even on the recording. Charles Montgomery hit the spacebar, freezing the frame on Brady's face, contorted in violent rage, shoving an innocent man's head into the steel of the car. As the court can clearly see, Charles said, his voice slicing through the stunned silence. "My client did not yell. He did not refuse to provide identification. He did not open his door. And he most certainly did not throw a punch." Judge Margaret Caldwell sat frozen on the bench. For a full 10 seconds, she did not move. She did not speak. The silence in the room was heavier than gravity. When she finally looked down at Officer Thomas Brady, the sheer, unadulterated fury radiating from her was terrifying. Brady was gripping the wooden rail of the witness stand so hard his knuckles were white. He looked like a cornered animal. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "Officer Brady," Judge Caldwell whispered, her voice shaking with an anger so deep it shook the walls. "What did I just watch?" "Your Honor," Brady stammered, panic finally bleeding into his voice. "The angle. It doesn't show the whole." "Do not speak," Caldwell roared, slamming her wooden gavel down so hard the handle cracked. The sound fired like a gunshot. "Do not insult my intelligence by telling me not to believe my own eyes. You sat in my courtroom, you placed your hand on a Bible, and you lied to my face. You used your badge to assault an innocent man, and then you tried to use my court as a weapon to destroy his life." She turned her blazing eyes to the prosecution. "Mr. Sterling, Your Honor." Sterling gasped, holding his hands up in immediate surrender. The state had absolutely no knowledge of this footage. "We are horrified. The state immediately drops all charges against Mr. Pendleton with extreme prejudice." "That is the smartest thing you've said all morning," Caldwell snapped. Then, she pointed a trembling finger directly at Brady. "Bailiff," she ordered, "take this man into custody." Brady recoiled. "What? Your Honor? You can't. I am holding you in direct contempt of court," Caldwell shouted, leaning over the bench. "Furthermore, I am directing the district attorney's office to immediately file charges against you for felony perjury, falsifying a police report, and aggravated assault. You are a disgrace to that uniform. Get him out of my sight." Two massive court bailiffs moved in instantly. They didn't use the gentle touch Brady was used to from his peers. They grabbed his arms roughly, wrenched them behind his back, and snapped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. The poetic justice of the cold metal clicking into place echoed loudly in the room. Arthur Pendleton sat at the defense table, his face a mask of calm, but inside, a profound wave of vindication washed over him. He watched the bully, who had brutalized him in the dark, being dragged out of the courtroom in the light, his career and his freedom completely destroyed. The karma that followed Thomas Brady was merciless, swift, and completely devastating. Because the assault was entirely unprovoked, documented on high-definition video, and involved malicious prosecution, the federal government stepped in. The Department of Justice hit Brady with civil rights violations under the color of law. The local police union, seeing the absolute PR nightmare and the undeniable video evidence, immediately abandoned him. 6 months later, Thomas Brady stood in a federal courtroom, stripped of his badge, stripped of his pension, and wearing a bright orange jumpsuit. A federal judge sentenced him to 8 years in a maximum security penitentiary. The rookie, Kevin Miller, was fired from the force for complicity and failing to intervene, his career in law enforcement over before it even began. As for Arthur Pendleton, he didn't just walk away with his freedom, he filed a massive civil rights lawsuit against the city and the police department. They settled out of court in less than a month for $15 million. Arthur didn't buy a new car or a new house. He took every single penny of that settlement and founded the Pendleton Justice Initiative, a massive legal defense fund dedicated entirely to providing top-tier, ruthless legal representation to minority citizens who had been falsely accused and brutalized by corrupt police officers. The racist cop had wanted to teach the successful black lawyer a lesson about power. Instead, Arthur Pendleton taught him that true power doesn't come from a badge and a gun in the dark. It comes from the truth brought into the light and wielded like a sword. Did Arthur's calculated courtroom revenge leave you cheering? Justice served cold is the best kind of karma. If you loved this story of an arrogant, corrupt cop finally getting exactly what he deserved, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more intense, real-life stories of hard karma and ultimate payback. Drop a comment below.